Pew pew! Brrr, they just won't stop coming! Pew pew! Bleh. It's like, Django, I know we were hired to stop the zombie virus from infecting the clone facilities, but I just heard Joe the Hutt just died, and all of his holdings are up for grabs. Well, I think that sounds like a better deal than this. Yeah! Why are you shooting my hand?
Because it's funny.
Okay.
There.
Hello there, I'm Guilmaster Dan, and welcome to the Fourth Wall. Now, something that a lot of GMs tend to forget is that PCs, or player characters, are run by people. They're not just characters in a story that we're telling. No, they are living, breathing characters, or at least characters that are being run by living, breathing people that may have interest in things different from the story that we're telling at the time. This doesn't affect all game masters, of course, as some game masters like to run games as sandbox style, meaning players can go out and pursue whatever adventure they want to. But that's not for every game master, or at least some game masters would have trouble running this type of game because they're used to telling linear stories or running modules. Well, what can you do in order to run a game in a sandbox style? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. So, Dan, I want to give this sandbox thing a try. I want to create a world, take my players, and plop them in there. What do I do? Well, first thing to keep in mind is that you either need to be really good at improv or really good at pre-planning. Most GMs, you're going to be at least proficient in both if you're not heavily one way or the other. Certainly, you are always going to need improv, and you're always going to need to be able to plan. So, at least be proficient at both of those things. In either case, you need to be able to think on the fly. If you're running improv, where you have nothing pre-planned, you just come up with the story and the adventures on the fly as the players go, that's great. Some people can do that. Some players, they have a hard time coming up with it on the fly, and they need to have characters and adventures handy. Know your strengths, work with what you're good at. If you want to try working in a different style, be sure that your players know about that ahead of time so they can be prepared for if you need to change it, halfway through to something that you're all more comfortable with. Generally, what I'd like to recommend is when you're running a sandbox game, think of things in ifs, I like to call it. Or specifically, if-then. For you programmers out there, this is a perfect example for you. If-then, as in, if my players do this, then this happens. If my players do that, then this happens. Think of it like that. Think of the world in ifs. Everything that's surrounding your players at a given time, think of it as ifs rather than certainties. When you're running a module, it's naturally there's going to be foreshadowing and things to narrow their path to certain outcomes. There might be set outcomes along the way, but they're going to be narrowed that way. Almost in a similar way to how that was written in the first place, you're writing what happens as they go through it. If they do this, then this happens. If they do that, then this happens. Kind of be thinking about that in whatever scene that they're in at any given time. You generally want to have you generally want to have multiple plot seeds around a player. Like, for example, if your players start in town, you want to have multiple seeds that they can follow to. They may be at the tavern and overhear somebody squabbling off in a corner. That may be a plot seed if they listen in on that. And then if they go shopping that day, they may come across a person talking to the town guard emphatically about something that happened at their farm. That's a plot seed that they could follow. They may just flat out go to a bulletin board. Every single posting on that bulletin board is a plot seed. Have multiple plot seeds available that your players can pursue, that they can go off. If you only have one at a time, they're going to start to feel like it's, railroaded. Or they'll start down that path, find something else they're more interested in, and shoot off that way. Everybody's run into that, where players want to derail the story. Well, when you're in a linear story, that's what happens. When you're running a sandbox story, that's just the way that they go. For whether you're good at improv or whether you like to pre-plan, if you like to pre-plan, this is a must. But it's generally a good idea to have a bunch of resources on hand, lists of NPCs, lists of locations, adventure seeds, having a bunch of pre-made ones handy. For you improv GMs out there, sometimes you're not going to be able to come up with a story on the fly, or you can't think of a character on the fly. It's nice to have that handy so the game isn't ground to a halt while you sit there and think of a new character for them to interact with. Sometimes it's good to have that on the hand. There's lots of great resources for that. Particularly from Engine Publishing. They have several books on those resources that can be really handy. I'll put a link down below to check it out. Also, if you like pre-planning, those are a must. You have to have, if you are not good at improv, that is a must, having those available. Whether you put them on note cards, whether you have them in a binder, whatever, have them available. You'll need them, or, you could use them to generate like adventures at a time. I've done that before where I've ran a sandbox game, but before every session, I write out possible adventure that they could go on, using my resources. Something that is important to when you're running a sandbox game is that you're running a living, breathing world. So you want to keep track of what's going on in that world. If you have multiple adventure seeds, like we were discussing, you want to keep track of what's going on in those adventure seeds that the players didn't go on. For example, if in the scenario that we started this video with, the party in there chose not to finish their mission to stop the zombie virus from spreading to the clone facilities, right? So they may come back to town and either their employer is super pissed at them and, decides to hire bounty hunters to hunt them down. Or, worse, that zombie virus spreads throughout all those cloning facilities and causes a weak point in the Clone Wars, and the Federation of Separatist States, or whatever they're called, the Separatists win. You want to keep track of what's going on. Even though the players can pursue whatever they want, events may still happen to them based upon their decisions. You want to keep track of what's going on in the world, maybe where, key NPCs are and what they're doing separate of the players. And this could be as simple as just taking a few notes after a game of what could be happening off on the side and what could be reintroduced later. Certainly, you want to create a sense of continuity by building off of your character's choices in previous adventures. Bring back story ideas, bring back plot threads, if you will, bring back characters and everything. It'll create a sense of continuity and make your world feel more alive, and your players will become more invested in it because it feels like a living, breathing world. When they are on adventures, try to avoid thinking of the adventure line as plot. If you start thinking of it as plot, you may fall into that linear storytelling perspective where anytime they try and go off the path, you have to try and bring them back. Remember, you're running a sandbox game. They can go off and explore whatever they want. There may be consequences to that, to them going over here when they were supposed to be going over here, but they're allowed to do it. They get to go do that. This is a sandbox game. They can pursue whatever they want. And, you just got to remember that there are consequences to their actions. That's dealing with the continuity we were talking about. Bring that back later so, it feels like a breathing world. They chose not to save the princess and instead went off to save a town of kobolds. Well, that princess was killed. Even though they saved that one town and they were praised as heroes by those townsfolk, they suddenly have, bounty hunters and city guard or royal guard coming after them, treating them like criminals because they chose not to save the princess, but this town instead. See how that's feeling like a breathing world. That creates a new dynamic that you can then, run a new adventure with. You want to run them like they're in a world where they can pursue what they want, and you don't have to railroad them anywhere. It's just that there are consequences to their actions. There's a sense of continuity to what they're doing. Now, if you have a hard time doing this, if you have a hard time keeping track of all this other stuff, or at least you have a hard time doing it on the fly, there is a means of doing this that can still make it feel like a living, breathing world. You can make things a little bit more mechanical by making things modular. And I don't mean like running modules. Now, certainly you can run a world that feels living, breathing by running modules, by running like a series of them, having multiple available. That's essentially what you can do with your plot threads. When you have your players go and explore an adventure seed, they go on an adventure, have that adventure be completely self-contained. Maybe have all of your adventures going to different regions of your world. And when they're in that region, they don't have to deal with anything from outside of the region. They come into the region, this is the main thing that's going on here, but very important here, you don't want to just have that one main thing going on. When they come into that region, when they come into that modular box, if you will, you want to have side quests. You want to have little diversions that they can go on if they choose to, because that's going to make it feel like that living, breathing world. It may be contained in the fact that you only have a limited number of NPCs or a limited number of events going on that you have to deal with, making it easier for you to handle, but you know, it still feels like a larger place. That way, when they come back to a hub region, which you would probably want in that scenario, you know, they can still come away from that and hear of news of what's going on from what they did over there in that region, as well as what's going on in other regions. You know, use that to build new story elements. Maybe have something come back from there and combine with something that went on somewhere else. Use it to create new modular adventures, different regions and such. You can make it easier for yourself. Instead of tracking an entire world, you can keep track of any, you know, given region at a point, any little module, and just keep notes on the side of what's going on everywhere else, so that when they actually come back to where they get exposed to everything, they can hear about what's going on everywhere and, you know, choose where to go next. If you do choose to do modular play in a sandbox, you do need to be good at running a linear story. Yes, you have introduced the side quests that I mentioned so that they can pursue, you know, their own desires as they want, but you need to be good at, say, giving hints in order to get them back on track. Sometimes when you run a linear story, your players, though they may get distracted, and you can run with that in a sandbox game, they sometimes hit brick walls. And maybe they've run out of all the side diversion stuff that you had prepared, and all you have left is this that main plot line to this region, to this module. Sometimes players hit, brick walls. They're just not getting the clues that you had made up beforehand. Work on introducing clues on the fly. Maybe they didn't get this clue, or this clue wasn't obvious enough. Introduce a different clue. That original clue could be there in case, somebody goes, that's what that meant. No, but you can introduce new clues, side stuff. Maybe NPCs talk about something or something that they notice. Don't try and force them into that one clue. They might just never get that clue. If you have everything linchpinned on that clue, it could fall apart. Work on being able to introduce other clues to get them to still go on the route that you're looking for. Now, again, this sounds like it may be counter to a sandbox style game, but again, if you're going to be running it modular like that to make it a little bit easier for you because that's what you're used to, then you still need to have these skills. I mean, if you're new to running sandbox games, I would actually recommend running it more modular like this because it makes it easier. You only have to track so many things going on at any given time while just, keeping general notes on the outside stuff. It's easier to run a sandbox game that way to start with, at least. Some game masters can run sandbox games where the players are on this continent, but in the back of their head, they know that the royal family they dealt with back on the other continent years ago, what they're doing right now. Just in case those players ever come back to the other continent, they know what's going on. And that's something that I would really only recommend for really experienced game masters, ones that, you know, they're used to running sandbox games. Don't feel like you have to do that right off the bat. Keep it small, keep it simple, work in a way that is easier for you to start. Don't try and do the gigantic picture at once. Start off simple, because it'll make your game better. Your game will then grow with the players and as a group and as a world. It'll feel more natural that way, versus if you try and force the really big picture and you get overwhelmed and it collapses on you. Ultimately, you want to start simple. You want to start in a way that works off of what skills you're good at. Regardless, like I said, just to reiterate some things, if you're going to run a sandbox game, have resources on hand. Have NPCs or locations or events on hand that you can work with just in case you have a brain fart or in case you're not good at coming up with on the fly. Also, don't be afraid of borrowing from media. If you have a character from a movie or an anime or a book that you like, don't be afraid to use it. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, feel free to borrow memorable characters to move the story along. That's perfectly fine. Don't be afraid to use adventures from, stories and things. There's lots of great movies that could work as, say, a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Or, you may like one type of story, but you're running a different type of game. Take the starting scenario that we had to begin with. I have not seen a lot of zombie stuff in Star Wars, but I'm sure people have done it before, and that could be a very interesting story if you're running a Star Wars role-playing group. Who knows? Don't be afraid to borrow from stuff. Also, think of things in if and then. It's getting yourself in that mindset helps you be prepared for anything your players can do. It'll help you be prepared for unpredictable players, pretty much. If they do this, then this. If they do that, then this. Have some of those in your mind. Think of those as they're going through their adventures. Also, don't be afraid to, make things modular and start small. Keep track of small amounts of things, because you're trying to create a living, breathing world. You do want to keep track of things. You do want to bring plot elements and characters back later, because you're going to create a sense of continuity. But, again, running a sandbox game is a big topic, and there might be something I didn't cover, or you guys may have your own tips for game masters that don't normally run sandbox games. Please, if you have something to add, or even if you disagreed with something I had to say, please feel free to leave a comment below. Please like, share, and subscribe so we can keep the conversation going. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. So, some of you guys may have noticed that we've hit 200 subscribers. We're actually over 200 subscribers by this point, but yay! And we're trying to think of something to do for you guys to celebrate having enough people to fill up a theater. So, we want your guys' opinion. Do you want to have a contest? Or would you like me to do something like another top 6 or something video over here? Would you like a top X video, or would you like a contest? Go ahead and click one of these and tell us which you'd like to do, or leave a comment below in case these don't work on whatever device you're watching this on. Otherwise, again, we'll see you guys next time, and yay! 200!